San, a familiar aroma tantalized my nostrils. It was the tempting smell of my mother's cooking. My eyes glanced at a red cushion on a brown table, the same colors of my grandmother's living room furniture. A door slammed, a dog barked, a white cloud sailed through a blue sky. I was reliving my childhood in Makio, hallucinations. At noon, with the Roshi's permission, my husband told me that he had achieved Kensho. Now or never, I told myself. A pumpkin wife cannot be married to an enlightened husband. I vividly recalled the story of the youth with the knife and incense. Death or deliverance became my watchword. I inhaled deeply and with each exhalation concentrated with all my might on mu. I felt as though I were all air and would levitate any second. I crawled into the belly of a hideous, hairy spider. Mew, mew, mew. I groaned, and I became a big, black mew. An angel, it seemed, touched me ever so softly on the shoulder, and I fell backwards. Suddenly I realized that my husband and Tai-san were standing behind me, but I could not move. My feet were absolutely numb. They practically carried me outside, and I sobbed helplessly. I was already dead, I said to myself. Why did they have to bring me back to life? At Dokusan the Roshi told me that this was but a foretaste of Kensho, it was not yet realization. Then I took a little walk and suddenly the whole experience of the last few days seemed utterly ridiculous to me. That stupid Roshi, I remember thinking, he and his oriental hocus pocus. He just doesn't know what he's talking about. At dinner, half an hour later, as I was fumbling with my chopsticks, I felt like getting up and handing him a fork. Here, old boy, let's get used to Western ways. I giggled at my own joke. Throughout the evening chanting I could hardly keep a straight face. After the Roshi's final words I wanted to pick up my bag and walk out, never to return, so unreal did it all seem. In his first lecture the Roshi had told us that mu was like a red-hot ball stuck in the throat which one can neither swallow nor spit out. He was right, so right. As I look back, every word, every move was part of the deliberate plan of this venerable teacher. His name, White Cloud. Hakun, indeed fits him. He is the greatest, whitest cloud I have ever experienced, a real antidote to the dark atomic mushroom. Now I was in bed, doing zazen again. All night long I alternately breathed mu and fell into trances. I thought of the monk who had reached Kensho in just such a state of fatigue. Eventually I must have dozed off in complete exhaustion. Suddenly the same light angel touched me on the shoulder. Only this time I awoke with a bright, ha, and realized I was enlightened. The angel was my kind tired husband tapping me on the shoulder to waken me to go to session. A strange power propelled me. I looked at the clock. 20 minutes to 4, just in time to make the morning sitting. I arose and calmly dressed. My mind raced as I solved problem after problem. I arrived at the session before 4 o'clock and accepted an offer of coffee with such a positive, yes, that I could not believe my own ears. When Tai-san came around with his sword, I told him not to bother hitting me. At Dokusan I rushed into the little cottage my teacher was occupying and hugged and kissed him and shook Tai-san's hand. And let loose with such a torrent of comical verbosity that all three of us laughed with delight. The Roshi tested and passed me, and I was officially ushered through the first barrier of the gateless gate. A lifetime has been compressed into 1 week. 1,000 new sensations are bombarding my senses, 1,000 new paths are opening before me. I live my life minute by minute, but only now does a warm love pervade my whole being, because I know that I am not just my little self but a great big miraculous self. My constant thought is to have everybody share this deep satisfaction. I can think of no better way to end this account than with the vows I chanted at session every morning. All beings, without number, I vow to liberate. Endless blind passions I vow to uproot. Dharma gates, beyond measure, I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha I vow to attain. 6. Mr. A. K. A Japanese insurance adjuster, age 25. I first began to think seriously about life and death at the age of 12 when my 8-year-old brother died of a kidney disease. I grieved so much over his death that I collapsed at his funeral. Deep within me was a feeling of contrition so strong that I remember crying out, "Forgive me, forgive me." Quote, 4 years later my only other brother drowned. This was such a profound shock that I began to question over and over. Why is life so uncertain and miserable? Are we born only to die? I was overwhelmed by a feeling of utter helplessness. School study was sheer drudgery, and every day was a day of misery. Why are we born? Why do we die? Quote, this question obsessed me like an eternal nightmare. In hopes of ending my wretchedness I began avidly to read the Bible of one of the postwar religions in Japan, called The Truth of Life. After the death of my younger brother my parents had become followers of this sect for a short time. It urged, live a life of gratitude with a smile. Be meek and always respond with, yea. This was all very well, but how one cultivated meekness and gratitude was not made clear. It further claimed that man, as the Son of God, is without flaw, and that through his identity with God he could realize this innate perfection. But why, I questioned, should man, who they insist is born free, be tied even to God, eternally enslaved by him? This can't be the way to peace of mind. Disillusioned, I dropped this religion out of my life, convinced that it was no more than an opiate. I was just 17 when, in August 1949, I came to Sosei-ji, a Soto temple, to ask the abbot what Buddhism was. He was pleased to see me and said, "It cannot be explained in a sentence, but let me tell you the reply given by a renowned Zen master to the same question." When the Chinese poet Hakurakuten asked Zen master Dorin about the mysteries of Buddhism, he was told, "Avoid evil, practice good. Keep the heart-mind pure." This is what all Buddhas teach. Point 32. Remember, the abbot continued, Zazen is the most direct way to understand Buddhism, but choosing a good teacher is paramount. In November of that year I attended my first Zazenkai, conducted by Yasutani Roshi. To my surprise, I found the Roshi to be a simple old man with no apparent dignity, wearing the shabbiest of robes. In a quiet voice he spoke about counting the breath in Zazen while facing a wall, but such questions as, what is the meaning of life? Or, how do we get rid of suffering? He didn't deal with at all. However, I began to count my breath in the manner he instructed, though it went against my grain. Zen can't be real, I told myself, it must be a fake. Quote, but for some reason I went again when the next Zazen meeting rolled around and continued to go. Upon learning of Kensho, through which experience the Roshi claimed human suffering could be dissolved, I made up my mind to get Kensho so that I could disprove the Roshi. My skepticism persisted for 2 years until I was finally persuaded by a senior member of the Zazenkai to join a 3-day session. He had told me, if you don't come back a wiser, stronger man, you can knock my block off. The Roshi gave me Mu as my first koan. While half of me strove resolutely for Kensho, the other half held back in fear of the fierce blows of the Kyosaku. I went to no more session until the next year, when I attended 5 in succession. By now every one of my doubts as to the validity of Zen had vanished, but for all my striving I could not reach the point of Kensho. Each time I returned from a session I found that I had grown calmer and better able to deal with my daily life. Despite this gain, however, I felt that with no Kensho I had spent another year in vain. It was now my graduation year, 1954, and the fear that I would have no time for zazen in business life fired my determination to get Kensho before I finished school. In this state of mind I joined the March session. On the third day I was struck with peculiar force by this remark of the Roshi. Mu is nothing but mu. It was a simple statement that I had often heard from him, but now it hit me like lightning. Then why on earth have I been imagining otherwise? A heavy load suddenly fell from my shoulders, but because this was not yet realization, I fell into darkness again. At afternoon Dokusan I had nothing to say to the Roshi and returned to my place disheartened. With this insight, however, I became convinced that Kensho was entirely possible for me. Repeatedly I had urged my mother to accompany me to a zazen meeting, and she had steadfastly refused. Now she went and very quickly attained Kensho. I was dumbfounded. Her experience so set me on fire that at the following month's session I redoubled my efforts. With strong encouragement from the Roshi, who urged, only one more step, I fiercely applied myself to my koan. But in my deepest unconscious I was still conceiving mu as something outside me. That's why the world of Kensho never appeared. Bitterly disappointed, I told myself, you have sat and sat, yet you haven't succeeded. There must be something wrong with you. Quote. Deeply discouraged, I talked myself into believing I lacked the intrinsic potentiality for enlightenment. Still I continued to attend session after session, for reasons which were obscure to me at the time. But I could no longer pour myself into zazen. Then I began to think in this wise. Since the universe and I are one, to understand the meaning of the universe I must understand myself. But I won't be able to understand myself until once and for all I end my habit of seeking mu outside myself. Quote. By the following year I had recovered a good deal of my former spirit and was able to sit with a calm, vigorous mind. This encouraged me to participate in subsequent session. Returning to my regular life after each such session, I was astonished to find myself so changed. Every day was a day of gratitude, and when I went to bed at night after a hard day's work, I felt grateful to be alive, though I didn't know why. By now I had a considerable theoretical knowledge of enlightenment, but when I reflected that it had not brought me awakening, a restless discontent took hold of me. I knew that deep down I still feared death and shrank from life. I was suspended between a feeling of gratitude on the one hand and anxiety and frustration on the other. One hot August evening as I sat with my parents at home during a period of zazen, I suddenly experienced myself as a ripple spreading endlessly throughout the universe. I've got it. There is no universe apart from me. This repeatedly flashed into my mind. While it was no more than an insight, it convinced me I was nearing Kensho, and I began to sit more earnestly. My habit of reasoning about mu, however, persisted. What a cursed thought is! I would exclaim in chagrin. It confuses the mind, creates disputes between people by setting them apart from each other, it creates war itself. Stop thinking. Stop analyzing. Quote. Not long after this I went to a zazen meeting at which Yasutani Roshi delivered a Tisho on the 3 gates of Oryu, a koan from Mumunkan. At one point he was saying, how does your hand compare with the hand of a Buddha? Reaching out in your sleep for your dislodged pillow, instinctively you recover it. One's whole being is no different from this timeless hand. When you truly realize this, you will spontaneously burst into laughter. Quote. Hearing these lines, my mind became enormously cleansed, and I trembled with joy. But since I had not yet gained true freedom, I decided to say nothing of this during Dokusan. Considerably heartened, however, I renewed my efforts to penetrate deeper into my koan. The 1-week August session had arrived. Owing to the pressure of business, I could not get to the temple until noon of the second day. My strategy for this session was to sit determinedly, like a ball of fire, during sitting periods, and to relax completely during rest periods. At the opening of the third day, the Roshi had reminded everyone. Every year at this great session at least one person gets Kensho. Then and there I made up my mind that if anybody got Kensho it would be me. The fourth day had come. Again and again I was walloped by the Kyosaku, once so hard that my mind and body became momentarily paralyzed. This day I fought the hardest. But in spite of everything, I still could not come to Kensho. Now it was the fifth day. Only a day and a half remained to me. On the sixth day I threw my last ounce of energy into the battle, allowing nothing whatever to sidetrack me. After the morning chores, and just before the Roshi's talk, a university student sitting near me suddenly yelled out, "You foolish, stupid guy," referring to himself. Go on. One more step. Only one. The summit. Die if need be, die. The strength of his desperation flowed into me and I began to concentrate as though my very life depended on it. My mind was empty as an infant's as I listened to the Roshi's lecture. He was reading from an ancient koan. Not even a sage can impart a word about that realm of silence, from which thoughts